There's a moment, right before everything falls apart, when you can still pretend it isn't happening. I was standing under fluorescent lights, in front of more people than I could count, and I could feel my own heartbeat in my throat. My mother was 3 feet away from me. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking past me, over my shoulder, like I was a stranger asking for directions. "Say it again," I told her. "Say it to my face this time." Somebody in the crowd had their phone up. I remember that detail more than almost anything else. The small red dot blinking in the corner of a stranger's screen, recording the worst moment of my adult life, like it was a magic trick. My brother wouldn't look at me either. Rebecca had her hand over her mouth. And my nephew, Ethan, he was the only one who seemed to understand what was actually happening, and I could see it breaking something in him in real time. I'd spent 21 years learning how to stay calm when everything around me was falling apart. I'd talked down men with box cutters. I'd sat 2 rows behind people who wanted to bring a plane down and smiled at the flight attendant like nothing was wrong. I knew how to keep my hands steady when my whole body wanted to shake. None of that prepared me for my own mother. "You don't get to do this," I said, and my voice didn't break, even though I wanted it to. "Not here. Not after everything." She finally looked at me, and for 1 second, 1 single second, I saw something crack behind her eyes. "That's the moment I want you to remember, because we are going to get there. But first, you need to understand how a woman who has spent her entire career protecting strangers ended up begging her own mother to admit she existed. If this is your first time here, welcome. I tell stories like this one every week, real accounts of betrayal, family, and the moment people finally decide they're done staying quiet. If you want to know how this one ends, stick around. And if you're the kind of person who needs to know whether justice actually comes for people like my mother, do me a favor and hit subscribe, because you are going to want to see how this plays out. Now let's go back to the beginning. My name is Jocelyn Pierce. I'm 43 years old, and for over 2 decades I've worked as a Federal Air Marshal. Most people don't know what that means, and I'm not allowed to tell them much. I sit in the back of commercial flights, dressed like anyone else, and I make sure nothing happens. I've missed more Christmases than I can count. I've missed birthdays, graduations, a wedding I still feel guilty about. I've slept in more hotel rooms than I have in my own bed. I always told myself it was worth it, that the people who mattered understood. That my mother, my brother, the family I grew up with in a small house outside Colorado Springs, they knew what I was giving up, and why, and that it counted for something. I was wrong, but it took an airport to teach me that. It started with a phone call, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. "You're actually coming this year?" my brother Daniel asked. There was something in his voice I couldn't place. Not excitement. Something more careful than that. "I already put in for the leave," I said. "I'll be there. Mom's doing the whole thing. Turkey the good China. Rebecca's been planning it for a month." "That's great, Danny." "Yeah." A pause. "It'll be good to have everybody together." I remember hanging up and feeling something settle in my chest. Warm and hopeful, the kind of feeling I hadn't let myself have in years. Everybody together. 4 words that meant more to me than he probably realized. My mother, Evelyn, called 2 days later. "I want you to know I'm proud of you," she said, which surprised me enough that I sat down on the edge of my bed. "Whatever's happened between us, I want this Thanksgiving to be different." "I want that too, Mom." "Good." Another pause, longer this time. "Rebecca's handling most of the details. You'll fly into Denver, correct?" "Danny can coordinate." "I can just get a rental car, it's not a big..." No. Let Danny handle it. It'll be nice, everyone arriving together." I should have heard something in that. I didn't. I wanted the version of my family that loved me too badly to listen for anything else. My Aunt Linda was the only one who called just to talk. No agenda, no plans to coordinate. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" she asked. "I'm good. Excited, actually." It's been a long time since we were all in one place. It has, Linda said, and something in the way she said it made me sit up a little straighter. Just be prepared. People change. Feelings change. Feelings change. Sometimes not in the direction you'd hope. What does that mean? Nothing. I'm an old woman who worries too much. I'll see you at Thanksgiving. I didn't push. That's one of my flaws. I've spent so many years reading strangers for threats that I stopped reading the people I loved for pain. I let Linda's warning slide right past me, the same way I let a dozen smaller signs slide past me in the weeks that followed. Rebecca sent a group text with a detailed itinerary, down to the minute, for everyone's arrival at Denver International. Everyone's, except mine. When I asked about it, she said she'd sort me out separately since my schedule was complicated. I thanked her. I didn't ask why my schedule needed separate sorting when I'd sent my flight information a week earlier. My nephew Ethan called me the week before, which he never does. Hey, Aunt Jo. Just wanted to say I'm looking forward to seeing you. That's sweet, Ethan. You doing okay? Yeah. He stopped. Started again. Some of the stuff people say about you. About your job and why you're never around. It doesn't really add up when I actually think about it. What stuff? Never mind. Forget I said anything. See you at the airport. I told myself he was just being a 22-year-old, working through some family gossip that didn't mean anything. I told myself a lot of things that November. The morning of my flight, I stood in my kitchen in my Denver apartment, because I do live near my family, not that it ever seemed to count for much. And I looked at myself in the microwave door's reflection. I'd bought a new sweater for the occasion. Dark green, soft, the kind of thing you wear when you want to look like someone worth coming home to. I thought about the years I'd spent believing that love could survive on faith alone, that if I just kept showing up, kept sacrificing, kept choosing my country and my duty over birthdays and anniversaries, eventually the people I loved would understand that I was choosing them too, in the only way I knew how. I drove to Denver International that afternoon with that green sweater on and that hope still intact. I want you to hold on to that image of me, because it's the last time in this story I felt that way. The terminal was packed, the way it always is around the holidays. Families reuniting, kids running ahead of exhausted parents, the whole terminal humming with the particular joy of people about to see each other again. I spotted them before they saw me, my mother in her camel coat laughing at something Rebecca said. Daniel beside her, one hand on Ethan's shoulder. Linda, a few steps back, watching the crowd instead of the conversation. I smiled and started walking toward them, already rehearsing what I'd say. I made it. Told you I would. My mother's eyes passed over me like I was part of the terminal's furniture. I thought maybe she hadn't seen me yet. I got closer. Close enough that Daniel had to actively look somewhere else to avoid meeting my eyes. Close enough that Rebecca turned her whole body toward Ethan, cutting off the angle where I would have entered their circle. Hi, I said. Just that. Nobody answered. My mother laughed at something Linda hadn't even said, a bright, performed laugh, and put her arm through Daniel's, and the whole group shifted 3 feet to the left, the way a crowd shifts around an obstacle it doesn't want to touch. I stood there in my green sweater in the middle of Denver International Airport, surrounded by strangers who had never once made me feel like one, while the 5 people who were supposed to know me best walked past me like I didn't exist. Nobody said my name. Nobody looked back. And for the first time in 21 years of staying calm under pressure I had never trained for, I didn't know what to do with my own hands. I didn't cry in the airport. I want that on record. I cried in the parking garage, alone in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white, because 21 years of training had taught me exactly how to keep my face still in front of an audience, and absolutely nothing about what to do with the 10 minutes after the audience leaves. I drove home. I didn't call anyone. I told myself I'd give it a night, let everyone settle, and in the morning this would look like some kind of misunderstanding I could still repair. Daniel called me first, around 9 that night. "Hey," he said like nothing had happened. "You get home okay?" "Danny." You walked right past me. A pause, just long enough to tell me he'd been rehearsing something. "It was chaos in there, Joe. It was packed. I didn't even see you until we were already at the car. You had your hand on Ethan's shoulder 3 feet away from me." "I really didn't see you." "Say that again," I said, quiet. "Say it slower this time." He didn't say it again. He changed the subject to Rebecca's turkey and how Mom wanted everyone at the house by noon Thursday, like the whole thing at the airport was a weather delay, something you mention once and then move past. I went to Thanksgiving. I told myself I had to. If I didn't show up, I'd be handing them the exact story they already wanted to tell about me. That I was the one who couldn't be counted on, the one who walked away. My mother answered the door herself. "Jocelyn," she said, warm as anything, like the terminal had never happened. "You look thin. Are you eating?" "Mom, we need to talk about yesterday." Her smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes went flat and careful. "There's nothing to talk about. It was a big airport. You looked right at me." "I did not," she said, and she said it with such total conviction that for one disorienting second I almost doubted my own memory. "That's the thing about my mother. Nobody warns you about until you've lived it. She doesn't lie like a person covering something up. She lies like a person rewriting history, calm and certain, until the truth starts to feel like the thing that's wrong." "Mom?" I stood there. For almost a full minute. "Jocelyn." Her voice dropped, gentle and devastating at the same time. "Maybe if you were here more than 4 days a year, people wouldn't have to search a crowd to find your face. There it is," I remember thinking. "There's the real conversation." "I have a job," I said. "You know what that job requires." "I know you chose it. Every year, over and over, you chose it." She reached out and touched my sleeve, and somehow that made it worse, not better. "Family isn't where you show up after years away, sweetheart. Family is who never had to wonder where you were." I didn't have an answer for that. Not one that wouldn't have sounded exactly like the defensive, absent daughter she'd already decided I was. So I said nothing, and my silence became one more piece of evidence in a case that had apparently been building against me for years. Dinner was its own kind of quiet violence. Rebecca kept the conversation moving in careful loops that never once landed on me. Ethan watched the whole table like he was doing math that wasn't adding up. Linda sat across from me and barely touched her plate. I caught her in the kitchen afterward, alone, rinsing a dish she didn't need to rinse. "Linda, you saw what happened at the airport." She kept her eyes on the sink. "I saw a lot of things, Jocelyn." "Then why didn't anyone say anything?" "Because saying something means admitting there's something to say." She finally looked at me, and there was real pain in it. "I've watched this family for 40 years. I've learned when a door is closed, it's usually closed on purpose. Is that a warning?" "It's an apology I'm not ready to give yet," she said, and went back to the dish before I could ask her what she meant. The weeks after Thanksgiving were the strangest of my life. Nothing exploded. Nothing got resolved. The family simply absorbed what happened at the airport into its bloodstream, like an old injury nobody talks about but everyone quietly favors. Rebecca stopped including me in the group texts about the holidays. Daniel's calls got shorter, more dutiful. My mother sent a Christmas card addressed to the Pierce family, like I needed a formal invitation to be considered part of my own name. I threw myself into work, because work was the one place nobody was rewriting my history in real time. "You've been quiet," Marcus Reynolds told me one afternoon after a debrief. He'd supervised me for 6 years. He didn't ask personal questions often, which was exactly why I noticed when he did. "Long few weeks," I said. "You're the best I've got on domestic routes, Pierce. Sharpest instincts on my roster. Whatever's going on outside this building, it hasn't touched your work." He studied me a second longer than felt comfortable. That's not always a good sign, for what it's worth. People who never let it touch them usually aren't fine. They're just good at their jobs. I didn't answer him. But I filed it away. The fact that a man with no stake in my personal life saw more clearly in 5 minutes than my own mother had in 5 decades. That instinct Marcus was talking about didn't switch off just because I clocked out. A week later, scrolling old messages looking for a hotel confirmation, I found the group text Rebecca had sent before Thanksgiving, the one with everyone's detailed arrival times at Denver International. I read it again, slower this time, the way I'd been trained to read anything that didn't sit right. Daniel's flight landed at 1:40. Rebecca and Ethan's car arrived at 1:35. My mother's flight from Phoenix landed at 1:15. They'd all been standing in that terminal together for almost half an hour before I ever walked in. That wasn't chaos. That wasn't a crowd too big to see through. That was 5 people with 25 minutes to notice a woman in a dark green sweater walking straight toward them. I sat with that fact for a long time. Not the hurt of it. I already knew the hurt. The precision of it. My family hadn't failed to see me. They'd had time to decide not to. I called Daniel and asked him, plainly, how long they'd all been standing there before I arrived. I don't remember exactly, he said too fast. Does it matter? It matters to me. Joe, why are you doing this? Digging through old texts like you're building a case against your own family. He wasn't wrong about what it felt like. And for the first time, that scared me more than the airport had. I hadn't set out to investigate anyone. I'd spent my whole career learning how to notice what people didn't want noticed. And now I couldn't turn it off. Not even here. Not even against the people I loved most. That was the night I let myself think the thought I'd been avoiding for weeks. Maybe I had spent 21 years protecting people who never intended to protect anything of mine in return. Maybe the sacrifices I'd been so sure would eventually be understood were never going to be understood, because understanding them would have cost my family something they weren't willing to pay. The comfort of a story where I was the one who left. I sat alone in my apartment that night and, for the first time in my adult life, I let myself consider walking away from all of them. Not out of anger, out of exhaustion. A person can only stand in a terminal so many times before she stops expecting anyone to look up. My phone rang at 11:40 that night. Linda. I should have called you weeks ago, she said, her voice unsteady in a way I'd never heard from her. I've been telling myself it wasn't my place. But I keep thinking about that dish I was rinsing, and how easy it was to just keep rinsing it. Linda, what's going on? Your mother didn't just fail to see you at that airport, Jocelyn. A long breath on the other end of the line. She talked to Daniel and Rebecca about it beforehand. About how they'd all arrived together. About letting you find your own way in, like you always do. The room went very still. She used those words, like you always do. Linda's voice cracked. I was in the room, I didn't say anything. I've hated myself for it every day since. I sat down on the edge of my couch, my whole body suddenly light and hollow at once, because for weeks I'd been telling myself I was wrong to feel as betrayed as I did, that maybe it really was an accident, maybe it really was an accident, maybe I really was overreacting, maybe love in my family had just always looked different than I wanted it to. It wasn't an accident. It was a plan. And somewhere underneath the grief of finally knowing that, something else was starting to move. Something that didn't feel like heartbreak anymore. Linda, I said slowly, who else knew? She didn't answer right away. And in that silence, I understood that the real question was never whether my family had wronged me. It was which of them would finally be willing to admit it, and which of them would burn down everything left between us to keep pretending they hadn't. Linda never answered my question that night. She didn't have to. 2 days later, she called back and told me she was done rinsing dishes in silence, and that if I was willing, she wanted to help me end this the right way, not with a scene, Not with revenge. Just with the truth finally said out loud, where it couldn't be quietly explained away again. "Christmas Eve," she said. "Your mother's doing the big one this year. Everyone's coming." Rebecca invited half the neighborhood. "You want me to go there?" "I want you to stop waiting for a private apology that's never coming," Linda said. "You've spent your whole life protecting people who'll never know your name. Maybe it's time the people who do know your name finally had to say it in front of somebody who matters to them." I didn't sleep much after that call. Not from dread. From something steadier. The particular calm that used to come over me right before a flight I knew was going to require every bit of my training. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done asking for something my family had already decided not to give. Ethan texted me 2 days before Christmas. "Can we talk?" Just us. We met at a coffee shop near his apartment. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "I asked Mom straight out how long everyone was standing there before you showed up," he said, before I'd even sat down. "She said she didn't remember. Same thing Dad told you. I've never once seen my mother not remember a detail in my life. So I asked Dad to show me his messages. He didn't want to. That told me everything I needed before I even saw the timestamps. Ethan, I've spent my whole life thinking you were the one who didn't show up for us." His voice cracked on the last word. "Nobody ever told me you tried. Nobody ever told me what it actually cost you to do what you do. They believed what was easiest to believe." "I believed it too," he said. "That's what I can't get past." I didn't even question it. I just repeated it, over and over, because it's what everyone else in the family said and I never once asked if it was true. He looked up at me. "I'm done doing that. Whatever happens Christmas Eve, I'm standing with you." That was the first real payment on 21 years of debt. Nobody in my family had ever intended to acknowledge. It didn't fix anything. But it was the first crack in a wall I'd started to believe was permanent. Rebecca called me the next afternoon, her voice tight in a way I'd never heard from her. "People are talking," she said. "No greeting, no warmth. Carol from next door asked me why you weren't at Thanksgiving. I told her you were working." Now she's asking why Linda looked like she'd seen a ghost the whole dinner. I didn't say a word to Carol. I know, that's what worries me. A pause, brittle and calculating. "Jocelyn, whatever happened between you and your mother? Can we please keep it in the family?" "It was in the family, Rebecca. For 21 years. That's the whole problem." She hung up without saying goodbye. "For 21 years. That's the whole problem." She hung up without saying goodbye. I understood finally what Linda had meant weeks earlier. That Rebecca's loyalty had never really belonged to my mother. It belonged to whatever story kept her own reputation intact. And that story was starting to cost more than it protected. Daniel showed up at my apartment the night before Christmas Eve, unannounced, standing on my doorstep like a man who'd been arguing with himself the whole drive over. "I keep telling myself I didn't do anything wrong," he said, before I'd even opened the door all the way. "I just didn't do anything." I told myself that was different. "It isn't, Danny. I know that now." He rubbed a hand over his face. "I've spent years telling myself I was the responsible one. The one who stayed. The one who carried what you couldn't because you were never here. It was easier than admitting I let Mom decide what your absence meant instead of asking you myself. Why now? Because Ethan showed me the messages too. He met my eyes, and for the first time and longer than I could remember, I saw my brother instead of my mother's son. I'm coming tomorrow night, and I'm not staying quiet. I believed him. Mostly because he looked more frightened saying it than I'd ever seen him look about anything else in his life. The house was full by 7 on Christmas Eve. Family, neighbors, people I'd known since childhood and hadn't seen in years, all of it dressed up in the particular brightness my mother always insisted on. She met me at the door with a smile that had a slight tremor at the edges, like she already sensed the ground shifting under a house she'd spent her whole life building. "Jocelyn," she said, "I'm so glad you came." "Are you?" I said. Not a question. Linda found me first, squeezing my hand once hard, before drifting toward the kitchen with a look that told me she was ready. Ethan stood near the fireplace, watching the room the way I used to watch a cabin full of strangers, cataloging who was calm and who wasn't. Daniel stood near his mother, jaw tight, saying nothing yet. I hadn't planned it, but I was wearing the green sweater again. I didn't put it on this time hoping to look like someone worth coming home to. I put it on because I wasn't going to let one airport decide what that sweater meant to me. It happened during dessert, in front of nearly 30 people. My mother was telling a story. A warm one, practiced, about family and gratitude and the importance of showing up for each other. And something in me finally stopped waiting for permission to speak. "I have something to say," I said. And the room quieted the way rooms do when someone's voice doesn't sound like it's asking anymore. "Jocelyn," my mother said, still smiling, "this isn't the time. It's the only time you've ever given me." I kept my voice level, the way I'd learned to keep it level in far worse rooms than this one. 3 weeks ago at the airport, this family stood together for 25 minutes before I ever walked in. I have the messages that prove it. Times, dates, all of it. "You're embarrassing yourself," she said. Quieter now, the warmth gone cold underneath. "I'm not the one who planned it, Mom." Linda stepped forward from the kitchen doorway. "She's telling the truth. I was there when Evelyn told Daniel and Rebecca to let Jocelyn find her own way in. I heard it. I should have said something that day. I'm saying it now." The room had gone completely silent. "Linda," my mother started. "No." Daniel's voice, low and rough, cut through before she could finish. "Mom, I've spent 3 weeks telling myself I didn't see her at the airport. I saw her." I looked away. Rebecca's face had drained of color, her eyes darting to the neighbors, to Carol, to everyone whose good opinion she'd spent years protecting. Carol leaned toward her and asked, quietly enough that she probably thought no one else heard, "Is this what you meant about Linda at Thanksgiving?" Rebecca didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence in that moment cost her more than anything I'd said all night. "You don't understand what she put this family through," my mother said, turning to the room now, her voice rising, reaching for the only tool she'd ever needed before. 21 years of missed birthdays, missed holidays. Family isn't where you show up after years away. Family is who never had to wonder where you were. I let the silence sit there a moment. Long enough for every person in that room to feel the weight of what she'd just said out loud, in front of witnesses, as if it were still a defense, instead of a confession. "You're right," I said. "Family isn't where you show up after years away. Family is who never had to wonder where you were." I let her hear her own words come back whole. "So tell me, in 25 minutes, standing in that terminal, which one of you ever wondered where I was?" I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking her for anything. "I never had to wonder where you were, Mom. You were always right here deciding what love was supposed to look like and deciding I didn't qualify. That's not family. That's control wearing a nice dress." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I spent 21 years protecting strangers who never once made me stand in a crowd wondering if I existed. You did that. In an airport. On purpose. Nobody spoke for a long moment. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in my memory, she had nothing rehearsed to say. "Evelyn." Linda's voice, gentle now instead of guilty. "It's over. Let it be over." The party ended early that night, the way you'd expect. Some relatives left quietly, uncertain what they'd just witnessed. Others stayed long enough to say something quiet to me on their way out, a hand on my arm, an apology on behalf of years they hadn't caused but had watched happen anyway. My mother didn't apologize that night. She may never fully understand what she did. Not the way I need her to. But something permanent broke in the authority she'd held over this family for as long as I could remember, and it didn't break because I took it from her. It broke because the truth finally weighed more than her version of it. Daniel and I talk every week now. Real conversations, not dutiful ones. Ethan calls just to check in, no agenda. Linda and I had dinner last month, and for the first time, neither of us needed to choose our words so carefully. Rebecca and I are still finding our way back to something. It's slower than I'd like. Some bridges take longer to rebuild than others, especially the ones that were never really about me in the first place. And my mother and I are somewhere I don't have a name for yet. Not estranged. Not healed. Just honest, for the first time in 21 years, about exactly where we stand. I still fly. I still disappear for weeks at a time, protecting people who will never know my name. But I don't come home anymore hoping that silence will be understood as love. I say what I need to say now, calmly, clearly, the same way I was trained to handle anything that threatens to go wrong at 35,000 feet. I earned that. And nobody gets to take it from me again. If this story meant something to you, I want to hear it. Would you have forgiven my family, or did you need exactly what I needed? The truth said out loud, before you could even consider it. Tell me in the comments below, and if you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe. I've got a lot more to tell you.